Oh, more thoughts and more sickness. It's the greatest mixture ever. I also don't know why I'm going on a complete science bender. Um, Science binge. That's what it is. Hi everybody, it's I, Vegeta FH1. So, okay, I'm now on the whole thing of time. Now, we traditionally think about time as linear. Now, universally created time, not man-made time, like your watch or it's 2 o'clock rather than 3. None of that shit. I'm talking about linear time. We traditionally think of it as forward and back. But what if it's not? What if it's what if time is its own set of dimensions? Like we what we think is like our 3D world. Well, we also kind of know about the 2D world and how you wouldn't be able to lift any objects because there's no vacuum under the item and yada yada yada. But what if time is its own state, its own set of dimensions? Not the fourth dimension, but its own complete state of dimensions. Like, it would have its own up, its own down, left, right. Time would have essentially what would be a 360 view completely around itself. Now, this is completely theory, of course. I like to deal with theories a lot. Anyway, but let's take time as being its own separate dimension, its own its own 3D. That's a real weird way of putting it, but I hope you get what I mean. I'll put it to you like this, right? Okay, in our dimension we've got 2D, we've got 3D, which is what the universe is, or what we expect the universe to be. Then we have its own fourth dimension. Now, everybody would say to you that the fourth dimension is time. But what if it's not? What if it's something totally different? We can't actually comprehend it. But it would be the same thing as 2D trying to think of 3D. 2D is used to 2D, and it has its own 2D thoughts. So whatever it is trying to think of 3D can't imagine that, because what it's inbuilt and what it's prescribed with is just 2D. Whereas 3D, we can think of 2D, but we can't think of 4D. Now, I could go say and just theoretically say 4D would be able to think of 3D, but not 2D, and they wouldn't be able to think of 5D, but whatever. So we take time out of this set of dimensions, right? And it's its own dimension, its own universe, so to speak. And it can see in all 360 degrees. But the reason we see time as being so linear is because everybody, not everybody, everything in the universe, being particles, molecules, nuclei, freaking everything, has its own time dimension. Now, if you can think of a ball with a spike sticking out of every square centimeter, every everywhere, in every single direction. The ball is actually made up of spikes, completely of spikes. Now, every single one of those spikes is a choice. I can have, like, I throw my left arm in the air, or I start clicking my fingers, or I start smoking my e-cig. Every single one of those choices, but it's also refined in every single direction, because every spike is, oh, well, I move my finger just that little bit. Or the subconscious choices that we don't have. Do my lungs continue to inflate and deflate? Does my brain continue to work? Every single one of them is a choice. For everything, not just human beings, but particles, for everything. And it's dictated to what everything is in its nature. Like, a particle is going to be a particle. A molecule is going to be a molecule. Nuclei going to be a nuclei, so on and so forth. And it'll dictate its own. I suppose that's a very strange way of thinking of it, because it's actually, that's leaning towards everything being actual sentient life, which is a very interesting concept. But let's just say, okay, I'll take myself, right? And I'm inside this ball of spikes, and every choice I make, that spike is my choice. So it's like looking straight at that spike and going in that direction. So every time you step forward, you're in the same ball, but you can make a different set of choices. So it seems like everything is linear time, because it has the past and it has the future. But every single time you step forward, you're turning the ball. So everything has its own different dimension, its own time dimension. It's just so weird to think about it. It would mean that time is not the fourth dimension, but instead a completely different set of dimensions. Which is weird. I know I think about this stuff, and like I come up with it in my head, and it's like, it makes sense, kind of, but it almost feels like it's not fully complete, if that makes any sense to you whatsoever. Like, if you draw on a board, you've got 2D, you got 3D, and you got 4D, and you've got 2D plane, 3D world, or 3D universe, and you got 4D time. Completely take that out and put it under the 3D and have its own set of dimensions. So what would dictate the time? Well, your choices. Every choice that's made in the universe. That's a lot of fucking choices. That's a lot of trying to keep track. So in essence, you couldn't actually go forward or back in time. And if you ever could, like say something traveling faster than light. If you ever could actually go forward and back in time, you could only manipulate your own choices. You could only manipulate your own choices because you are your own time dimension. You couldn't go back and kill your granddad, which would make you not exist. That you couldn't do that because it's not your choice that was made. It's the choice of all the other particles and molecules and everything else combining to make your grandpa and his choices. Which, when you think about it, all our grey matter is a bunch of electrons. And, well, flesh, obviously. But that is even made up of its own set of individual particles. So what you're actually having is the choice of all of these particles, which ends up the choice of the person, or the individual, in this case, your grandpa. So it might seem like we have our own will, so to speak, but it's the will of the particle inside you. That sounds really, really weird. I hope you're staying with me on this. But if everything has its own time dimension, you couldn't go back and manipulate another set of dimensions because you would be the only one going back. You would be experiencing or going back down the line of your experiences so you can change your choices. The ball being the experience, I suppose. So, you travel back down. But what about traveling forward? Well, the universe can only make so many calculations. Its probable outcome, its fictional outcome, and I suppose its complete maddening outcome. Whereas the stuff that makes up us would make a choice, which would make it seem like we have free will. But the universe can calculate what's in us because it knows it. It doesn't know us. It knows what controls us. So it could theoretically dictate which way those parts are likely to go. But then it has to calculate everything else that influences that. But going forward is a hell of a lot more difficult than going back. You could only change your own choices going back. But the future's not written. So you could technically change the choices of everybody else because depending on what time you stop in the future, the choices you make as an individual, as a person, inflict or influence those elements that are around you, which automatically changes the future. Because I could go in the future into 100 years. I wouldn't be alive if I had done that naturally. So you're technically changing the future by not going into the past. I'd actually love a scientist to think about that. Because it's a very unique. Unique is one way of putting it. Way of thinking of it. So if time was its own separate set of dimensions, could that explain not ghost particles, what are they called? Not phantom particles. I suppose I should look up the name, but I can't think of it. That being said, I'm sick, so yeah. If you tried... Okay. If you tried entering a set of dimensions like this, like the time dimension, if you put a physical object in the time dimension, what would happen? Well, I could imagine it being ripped apart. Let's say, okay, you have your ball of spikes, and every single spike is a direction you can go in. Every single choice. So you've put a physical object in the middle of that. Typically, or at least the way I would see it, it would go in every single direction. Which can't have two electrons taking up the same space. And since there's now multiples taking up the same space, they would annihilate each other, which would probably result in an explosion. Time dilation. You could ripple through, well, time. It would ripple through everything. Or would it ripple through just that particle's existence? That's really strange. Okay, you fire a photon. You fire it straight. Now, photons don't really have a choice in the matter. They're going to go straight. As much as they possibly could. Unless they hit magnetic fields, gravity forces, and so on and so forth. Or gravitational forces, should I say. It's gravitational field. Field. Jesus. Anyway. You send that photon down its life. Down its long, very straight and narrow life. And then you take that photon and you put it inside this time dimension. Well, it'll go back, it'll go forward, it'll go in every single direction. So anything that photon influenced during its lifespan will more than likely cease to exist. So if you saw that photon, you're pretty fucked. Pretty fucked. That said, we see these sort of things all the time with ghost photons, ghost particles, where they just pop in and out of existence. Now, last time I checked, things don't do that. But what if it's coming from that dimension? think about it. It has a complete mirror effect. Now, what I mean by a complete mirror effect is you could have a mirror straight in front of you. You could go to the side of it, and you could get a ball and bounce it off the wall in a total arc. In a complete arc. And that's going to look like there are two balls just doing a complete arc. That's essentially what a ghost particle does. But is it two or is it one? One stuck in its own time dimension going in every single direction. And because it can only go in one direction, it decides, what's the only thing I can influence? Well, myself. So it bounces off itself, which results in it coming into our universe, and then arcs, because, I don't know, it's sticking to itself. And then when it meets up with itself on the other side of the mirror, it annihilates. It's sticking to itself. Well, two electrons encompassing the same area of space being pulled apart. Maybe there's not as much merit there as I thought. But it's an interesting little thought. Time being its own complete separate dimension. Or its own set of dimensions. So what would be 2D time? Well, we're in it. Linear time, anyone? Forward and back? Seems 2D to me. Yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to take down. So, yay, another video. I've been uploading a lot of videos lately. Science binge. Why not? Unload my stupidity onto the world. If it gets someone thinking in a different direction and helps them to come up with something actually concrete, then hey, why not? I contributed in some small way. So, yeah. GG, everyone. Good game. And I'll most likely see you all again. Yeah.